Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals of Keti, royal food taster to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, a man whose job description is literally eat the pharaoh's dinner first and hopefully don't die. From testing wine for deadly nightshade to sampling honey that might contain arsenic, this is the story of ancient Egypt's most nerve-wracking dining experience, where every meal could be your last. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn in your small but comfortable chamber near the palace kitchens, already feeling the familiar knot of anxiety that starts every day when your job involves potentially dying for the pharaoh's breakfast. The morning air carries the scent of baking bread and brewing beer from the royal kitchens, but underneath those pleasant aromas is something else entirely. The subtle tension that permeates every corner of the palace, where poison could hide in any dish, any cup, any seemingly innocent morsel. Your position as royal food taster isn't just a job, it's a sacred trust that makes you the final barrier between the living God of Egypt and enemies who would destroy the kingdom by eliminating its divine ruler. Every bite you take could save Pharaoh's life, and every swallow might be your last contribution to maintaining cosmic order and political stability in the greatest civilization the world has ever known. The palace kitchen complex is already bustling with pre-dawn activity as dozens of cooks, bakers, and food preparers begin the elaborate process of creating the royal meals that will sustain Pharaoh through another day of divine responsibilities. But unlike the cheerful efficiency of ordinary kitchens, this workspace operates under the constant shadow of potential assassination attempts that could come from anywhere, anyone, at any moment. Head cook Hab greets you with the respectful nod reserved for someone whose life depends on detecting dangers that others might miss. His weathered face shows the strain of managing food preparation under conditions where a single mistake could result in not just professional failure, but the collapse of Egyptian civilization through the death of its god king. The kitchen staff understand that their work isn't just cooking, it's national security disguised as meal preparation. This morning's breakfast preparation involves ingredients that have been carefully sourced, transported, and stored under security measures that would impress modern intelligence agencies. The wheat for Pharaoh's bread comes from specific fields that are guarded throughout the growing season. The honey arrives in sealed jars with wax stamps that prove they haven't been tampered with during transport. Even the water is drawn from protected wells and filtered through systems designed to prevent contamination. But despite all these precautions, the final responsibility for Pharaoh's safety rests with you, the person whose trained palate and experienced instincts can detect the subtle changes in taste, texture, or aroma that might signal the presence of deadly substances hidden within seemingly innocent morsels. Your years of experience have taught you to recognize the bitter aftertaste of plant toxins, the metallic hint of certain mineral poisons, and the slightly altered texture that suggests contamination with dangerous substances. The first dish prepared for Pharaoh's morning meal is fresh bread, still warm from ovens that burn constantly to provide the royal household with the finest baked goods available in Egypt. The loaves are shaped into symbolic forms that honor various deities, while ensuring that Pharaoh's breakfast maintains proper spiritual significance along with nutritional value. But before these sacred loaves can reach the royal table, you must sample each variety to verify that the grain, yeast, and baking process haven't been compromised. You break off a small piece of the solar disk bread, examining its golden crust and soft interior for any signs of discoloration or unusual texture that might indicate contamination. The bread should taste like perfectly milled wheat, with subtle notes of honey and the clean flavor of Nile water used in the dough. Any deviation from this expected flavor profile could signal danger that requires immediate investigation and complete rejection of the entire batch. The taste test proceeds methodically, your trained senses analyzing every aspect of the bread's flavor and texture, while your body remains alert for the first signs of poisoning that could indicate the presence of deadly substances. Some poisons work quickly, causing immediate symptoms that would warn you of danger. Others are slower acting, requiring you to wait several minutes between tastings to ensure that no delayed effects threaten Pharaoh's safety. While waiting to confirm the bread's safety, you observe the preparation of other breakfast items, watching for any suspicious behavior among the kitchen staff or unusual procedures that might suggest tampering or sabotage. The cooks work under your careful scrutiny, understanding that their movements are being evaluated not just for culinary skill, but for signs of treachery that could endanger the divine ruler they serve. The honey preparation requires special attention because this sweet substance can easily mask the taste of many poisons, while its thick consistency makes it an ideal vehicle for delivering toxic materials in concentrated doses. You examine the honey's color, clarity, and consistency, looking for any variations that might indicate adulteration with dangerous substances. Pure Egyptian honey has a distinctive golden color and flowery aroma that reflects the desert blooms and cultivated flowers that sustain the kingdom's beehives. Tasting the honey requires particular caution because its sweetness can overwhelm other flavors while potentially masking bitter or metallic tastes that would signal the presence of toxins. You take only the smallest amount on the tip of your tongue, allowing the honey to coat your mouth slowly while analyzing its flavor profile for any foreign substances that don't belong in pure, uncontaminated honey. The fruit selection presents its own challenges because fresh produce can be contaminated during growing, harvesting, or storage with substances that might not be immediately detectable without careful examination. Today's fruit includes figs, dates, and grapes that must be individually inspected and tasted to ensure their safety for royal consumption. Each piece of fruit gets examined for signs of injection points where poisons might have been introduced, unusual discoloration that could indicate contamination, or texture changes that suggest tampering. The fig testing requires special care because these soft fruits can be easily injected with liquid poisons that leave minimal external evidence of tampering. You carefully examine each fig for tiny puncture marks or slight discoloration around the stem area that might indicate contamination. The flesh should be uniformly colored with the characteristic sweetness and texture of properly ripened figs, free from any bitter or unusual aftertastes that could signal danger. Date inspection involves similar scrutiny, as these naturally sweet fruits can conceal various toxins, while their wrinkled skin makes injection sites difficult to detect without careful examination. You test several dates from different parts of the delivery, ensuring that contamination hasn't been introduced at any point in the supply chain, from harvest to royal kitchen. Wine tasting represents perhaps the most dangerous aspect of your duties, because alcoholic beverages are frequently used as poison delivery systems in assassination attempts. The wine's alcohol content can mask many foreign flavors, while its prestigious status makes it a likely target for enemies seeking to eliminate Pharaoh through substances that might not be detected until too late. This morning's wine selection includes vintages from various Egyptian vineyards, as well as imported wines from trading partners who maintain diplomatic relationships with Egypt. Each wine must be individually tested for purity, examining not just the liquid itself, but also the clay vessels and wooden corks that might have been contaminated during storage or transport. You begin the wine testing with the domestic vintages, swirling each cup to release the wine's natural aromas while observing the liquid's color and clarity for signs of contamination. Egyptian wine should have the characteristic color and scent of grapes grown in Nile Valley vineyards, with regional variations that reflect different soil conditions and growing techniques used throughout the kingdom. The first sip involves only the smallest amount, barely wetting your tongue with wine while your senses analyze every aspect of its flavor profile. Good Egyptian wine has a clean, fruity taste with subtle variations that reflect the specific vineyard and vintage year. Any foreign flavors, unusual bitterness, or metallic aftertastes could indicate the presence of toxic substances that would make the wine deadly for royal consumption. Imported wines require even more careful testing because their unfamiliar flavor profiles make it more difficult to detect foreign substances that might blend with exotic tastes from distant vineyards. You must balance appreciation for legitimate foreign wine characteristics with vigilant detection of potentially dangerous adulterants that could threaten Pharaoh's life. The waiting period between wine tastings is particularly tense because many poisons used in assassination attempts take several minutes to produce their initial effects. During these intervals, you remain alert for any physical symptoms that could indicate poisoning, while continuing to observe the kitchen staff for suspicious behavior or signs of conspiracy that might threaten royal security. Beer testing follows similar protocols, but presents different challenges because Egyptian beer is a staple beverage consumed throughout the kingdom by people of all social classes. This widespread consumption makes beer poisoning potentially catastrophic if contaminated supplies reach the general population, while its commonplace nature might make enemies view it as a less suspicious delivery method for assassination attempts. Royal beer is brewed to higher standards than commercial varieties, using superior grain and more careful fermentation processes that produce cleaner flavors and more reliable alcohol content. You test multiple samples from different brewing batches, ensuring that quality control hasn't been compromised and that no foreign substances have been introduced during the brewing process. The midday meal preparation brings additional challenges, as more complex dishes require testing of multiple ingredients and cooking methods that might disguise the presence of toxic substances. Roasted meats must be examined for proper cooking temperatures that would neutralize some natural toxins, while ensuring that no foreign substances have been applied to the meat during preparation. Sauce testing requires particular expertise because these flavorful additions to royal meals often contain multiple ingredients that each could potentially harbor dangerous substances. The complex flavor profiles of Egyptian sauces make it challenging to detect foreign tastes that might indicate contamination, requiring your trained palate to distinguish between legitimate spice combinations and potentially deadly adulterants. Vegetable preparation involves examining produce for signs of contamination during growing, harvesting, or storage that might not be immediately visible but could pose serious threats to Pharaoh's health. Some plant toxins occur naturally and require careful inspection to ensure that contaminated specimens don't reach the royal kitchen, while other dangerous substances might be deliberately applied to otherwise safe vegetables. The afternoon brings news that creates additional tension in the royal kitchen as reports arrive of political unrest in distant provinces that might motivate assassination attempts against Pharaoh. This intelligence heightens security awareness throughout the palace, requiring even more careful scrutiny of food supplies and preparation methods that could be exploited by enemies seeking to eliminate Egypt's divine ruler. Emergency protocols are quietly implemented throughout the kitchen complex as security personnel increase their surveillance of food supply chains and preparation areas. Additional guards are posted at storage facilities, while background investigations are conducted on recently hired kitchen staff who might have been infiltrated into the royal household by hostile forces. Despite these security measures, your role as food taster remains the final and most critical defense against poisoning attempts that might evade other protective measures. Your experienced senses and trained instincts represent the last opportunity to detect dangers that could threaten not just Pharaoh's life, but the stability of Egyptian civilization itself. The evening meal preparation involves the most elaborate dishes of the day, requiring extensive testing of complex recipes that combine multiple ingredients in ways that might mask the presence of toxic substances. Tonight's menu includes ceremonial foods that honor various deities, while providing Pharaoh with the nutrition needed to sustain his demanding schedule of royal duties. Meat inspection requires careful examination of cooking methods and seasoning applications that might conceal dangerous substances within seemingly safe preparations. The royal cooks use elaborate spice combinations that create complex flavor profiles, making it challenging to detect foreign tastes that might indicate the presence of poisons designed to eliminate Pharaoh through his evening meal. Fish testing presents particular challenges because seafood naturally contains substances that could interact dangerously with certain toxins, potentially creating deadly combinations that might not be immediately apparent during individual ingredient testing. You must consider not just the safety of individual food items, but also their potential interactions when consumed together. The bread for evening meals often includes more elaborate preparations than morning varieties, incorporating additional ingredients that require individual testing to ensure their safety for royal consumption. These ceremonial breads might contain nuts, seeds, or dried fruits that each could potentially harbor dangerous substances while contributing to complex flavors that make poison detection more difficult. Wine service for the evening meal involves vintage selections that have been aging in palace cellars under security conditions designed to prevent tampering during storage. However, the extended aging process creates opportunities for contamination that might not be immediately apparent, requiring careful testing of wines that have been stored for months or years under conditions that seemed secure. As evening approaches, the accumulated stress of a day spent testing potentially deadly food creates a particular kind of exhaustion that combines physical fatigue with psychological tension from constant vigilance against threats that could emerge from any source at any moment. Your body carries the residual effects of multiple small tastings, while your mind processes the continuous assessment of danger that defines your daily existence. The kitchen staff begin cleaning and securing food supplies for the night, implementing storage protocols designed to prevent contamination during hours when direct supervision might be reduced. These security measures include sealed containers, locked storage areas, and guard rotations that maintain continuous protection for ingredients that will be used in tomorrow's meals. Your quarters provide a temporary respite from the constant tension of food tasting duties, but even personal meals require careful consideration of your own food safety, since enemies might target the royal food taster as a way of eliminating Pharaoh's protection against poisoning attempts. Your personal food supplies are maintained separately from royal provisions to prevent contamination that could compromise your ability to protect Pharaoh. Evening reflection involves reviewing the day's activities for signs of suspicious behavior or unusual circumstances that might indicate developing threats to Pharaoh's safety. You maintain detailed mental records of kitchen staff performance, supply chain variations, and any anomalies that could suggest infiltration or sabotage attempts directed at the royal food system. Sleep preparation requires releasing the day's accumulated tension while maintaining sufficient alertness to respond to overnight emergencies that might threaten royal security. Your sleeping quarters are positioned to provide quick access to the royal kitchen while maintaining security isolation that prevents potential enemies from targeting you during vulnerable overnight hours. The palace settles into its nighttime routine with guard changes and security checks that maintain protection for Pharaoh and his household throughout the dark hours when visibility is reduced and potential threats might approach under cover of darkness. These overnight security measures complement the food safety protocols that continue even when active meal preparation ceases. Tomorrow will bring another day of careful tasting and constant vigilance against threats that could emerge from any source within the complex network of suppliers, transporters, and kitchen staff who contribute to Pharaoh's daily nutrition. Your role as food taster represents just one element of the comprehensive security system that protects Egypt's divine ruler from enemies who would destroy the kingdom by eliminating its god-king. The responsibility weighs heavily, but also provides profound purpose, knowing that your daily sacrifice and constant vigilance help maintain the stability of Egyptian civilization through protection of the Pharaoh whose divine authority ensures cosmic order and earthly prosperity for millions of people. As sleep gradually approaches, the familiar sounds of the palace at night create a reassuring backdrop of security and continuity that has protected Egypt's rulers for generations of pharaohs who have depended on loyal servants willing to risk their lives for the greater good of the kingdom. The gentle rhythm of night guards walking their patrols mingles with the distant sounds of kitchen staff securing food supplies and preparing for tomorrow's meal service that will require another day of careful tasting and constant awareness of threats that could emerge without warning. In the peaceful darkness of your quarters, there is temporary escape from the constant tension of food tasting duties, but also quiet pride in serving a role that protects not just Pharaoh's life, but the divine kingship that maintains Egypt's relationship with the cosmic forces that govern universal order and earthly prosperity. The weight of responsibility gradually gives way to the natural rhythm of rest and restoration that prepares you for tomorrow's challenges while processing the day's experiences through dreams that might reveal insights into potential threats or guidance for maintaining vigilance against dangers that constantly threaten the royal household. Sleep brings temporary relief from the psychological pressure of constant threat assessment, but also the satisfaction of knowing that another day of successful food tasting has contributed to Pharaoh's safety and the continued stability of Egyptian civilization through protection of its divine leader. Tomorrow's challenges wait patiently in the future, new food supplies to test, new potential threats to assess, and continued vigilance against enemies who would strike at Egypt through assassination attempts directed at Pharaoh's most basic human need for safe and nutritious food. But tonight there is rest, peaceful sleep that restores body and mind for continued service in humanity's most dangerous dining room, where every meal could be the last for the person whose job is ensuring that Pharaoh's food is safe enough for the consumption of a living god. The gentle darkness embraces both rest and purpose, providing the peaceful environment necessary for restoration while maintaining the spiritual connection to divine service that motivates daily sacrifice in protection of Egypt's god-king and the civilization that depends on his continued survival. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace rests under the protection of guards and the watchful eyes of loyal servants, there is profound peace in knowing that your dangerous work helps maintain the cosmic order that has sustained Egyptian greatness for thousands of years. The rhythm of your breathing matches the eternal pulse of the Nile and the predictable cycles of Egyptian life that continue regardless of individual dangers and personal sacrifices made in service of the greater good that transcends individual concerns and connects personal duty to universal purpose. Morning will come with new challenges and renewed vigilance, but for now there is only peaceful sleep and the quiet satisfaction of serving a role that protects divine kingship through the most humble and dangerous of daily activities, ensuring that Egypt's living God can eat safely in a world where enemies lurk behind every seemingly innocent meal. The gentle darkness creates a lullaby of security and continuity, the quiet efficiency of people whose work maintains the complex systems that protect Pharaoh's life and preserve Egyptian civilization through daily acts of loyalty, courage, and careful attention to details that could mean the difference between life and death. And in that peaceful darkness, surrounded by the protective presence of fellow servants whose lives are dedicated to royal security, sleep carries away the day's tensions and fears, leaving only the deep satisfaction of service well performed in protection of the divine order that makes Egyptian greatness possible through the accumulated sacrifices of loyal people who understand that some responsibilities are worth risking everything to fulfill. The night passes in gentle dreams and restorative rest, preparing mind and body for another day of the most dangerous dining experience in the ancient world, where every bite could save a pharaoh's life or end the career of the person whose job is making sure that gods can eat without dying. Welcome back to our journey through Egypt's most carefully guarded secrets. Tonight we step away from the living pharaoh's chambers and into the shadowy realm where ancient mystery meets unexpected truth, where what appears to be supernatural curse reveals itself as something far more fascinating and human. From the mysterious deaths that followed the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb to the patient detective work that uncovered the real cause of the pharaoh's curse, this is the story of how fear, superstition, and very earthly dangers combine to create one of history's most enduring mysteries. We're about to spend the next 40 minutes unraveling the truth behind Egypt's most famous curse that wasn't actually a curse at all. You are Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic pathologist working in Cairo, 1952, called in to investigate the peculiar pattern of deaths that has haunted everyone connected to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb nearly 30 years earlier. Welcome to your assignment at the intersection of ancient history and modern science, where your job is to separate supernatural fear from medical fact and discover why so many people connected to the boy pharaoh's burial have died under circumstances that seem to defy natural explanation. The late afternoon sun slants through the dusty windows of your temporary laboratory in Cairo, casting long shadows across the files and photographs spread before you. The air carries the familiar scent of old paper and preservation chemicals, mixed with the distant aroma of spices from the city markets, a combination that has become the backdrop to your investigation into what the newspapers have sensationalized as the curse of the pharaohs. The scale of the mystery you're investigating goes far beyond simple coincidence. 22 people connected to the tomb's discovery have died over the past 3 decades, many under circumstances that seem too strange to be explained by ordinary medical causes. Heart attacks in healthy young men, sudden fevers that resist all treatment, infections that appear overnight and prove fatal within days. The pattern is consistent enough to fuel supernatural theories, while remaining medical enough to demand scientific investigation. But here's the thing that fascinates you most about this case. The deaths aren't random, and they're not supernatural. There's a pattern here, a logical sequence of cause and effect that's been obscured by fear, superstition, and the very human tendency to see divine retribution where careful analysis reveals something far more interesting and entirely earthly. Your investigation begins with the most famous victim, Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter's patron, who died just months after the tomb's discovery from what appeared to be a simple mosquito bite that developed into fatal pneumonia. The newspapers proclaimed it divine vengeance, but your medical training suggests something more complex and ultimately more fascinating than supernatural punishment for disturbing pharaonic rest. The autopsy reports, when you can find them, tell a story of compromised immune systems, unusual bacterial infections, and respiratory problems that seem to cluster around people who spent extended periods inside the sealed tomb chambers. The pattern suggests environmental exposure rather than divine wrath. But identifying the specific cause requires the kind of methodical investigation that separates legitimate medical inquiry from sensational speculation. Your first clue comes from studying the tomb's environmental conditions during the initial excavation period. The sealed chambers, undisturbed for over 3 millennia, had developed their own unique ecosystem of microorganisms, fungi, and bacterial colonies that thrived in the dark, humid conditions created by the sealed stone walls and organic materials within the burial goods. The preservation techniques used by ancient Egyptian embalmers, while effective at preventing visible decay, created ideal conditions for certain types of bacterial growth that could remain dormant for centuries until disturbed by the influx of fresh air and human activity that accompanied the tomb's opening. You spend long evening hours in your laboratory, examining samples collected from various tomb sites and comparing them to tissue samples when available. The work requires patience and precision, testing hypotheses against evidence and gradually building a picture of what really happened in those dusty chambers beneath the Valley of the Kings. The fungal analysis reveals particularly interesting findings. Several species of Aspergillus, a genus known for causing serious respiratory infections, were found in high concentrations within the tomb's sealed chambers. These fungi can remain dormant in dry conditions for extremely long periods, but become active when exposed to moisture from human breath and perspiration, exactly the conditions created when excavation teams entered the chambers. The respiratory symptoms documented in many of the victims, persistent coughs, fever, difficulty breathing, and eventual pneumonia, align perfectly with known effects of Aspergillus exposure, particularly in individuals whose immune systems might already be compromised by other factors such as age, stress, or pre-existing health conditions. Your investigation expands to include the working conditions during the excavation period. The team spent hours in poorly ventilated spaces, breathing air that had been sealed for millennia and was now filled with disturbed particles of organic matter, dust from decayed textiles, and microscopic fragments of mummification materials that had never been intended for human inhalation. The primitive safety protocols of 1920s archaeology meant that workers and supervisors alike were exposed to whatever hazards the tomb contained, without masks, ventilation systems, or protective equipment that modern excavations would consider essential for safe operation in confined, contaminated spaces. Temperature records from the excavation period reveal another contributing factor to the health problems experienced by tomb workers. The sealed chambers maintain temperatures significantly higher than the surrounding environment, creating stress on human physiology while also promoting the activity of dormant microorganisms that might otherwise have remained harmless. The combination of heat stress, poor air quality, and exposure to unknown biological agents created conditions that would challenge even healthy individuals while proving potentially fatal to those with compromised health or advanced age, who formed a significant portion of the expedition's leadership and financial backing. Your research into the specific burial goods and preservation materials used in Tutankhamun's tomb reveals additional potential sources of health hazards. The resins and oils used in mummification processes contain compounds that could become toxic when disturbed and inhaled in enclosed spaces, while certain metallic pigments used in tomb decorations included substances now known to be harmful with prolonged exposure. The psychological component of the curse proves equally important in understanding why so many deaths occurred among expedition members. The stress of working under intense public scrutiny, combined with growing fears about supernatural retribution, created conditions that suppressed immune function and made individuals more susceptible to the biological hazards they were encountering in the tomb environment. Stress-related immune suppression, well documented in modern medical literature, provides a mechanism by which fear itself could contribute to the very deaths that seem to validate supernatural explanations. The victims weren't dying from curses, but their belief in curses may have made them more vulnerable to the real environmental hazards they were actually facing. Your analysis of the timeline reveals deaths clustered around periods of intensive work in the deepest, most poorly ventilated sections of the tomb complex. This correlation suggests that exposure levels, rather than supernatural timing, determined which individuals developed serious symptoms and when they occurred. The bacterial cultures you've grown from tomb samples include several strains known for causing rapid onset infections that could easily be mistaken for supernatural affliction by observers unfamiliar with microbiology. Certain bacteria can cause fever, delirium, and death within days of exposure, creating the appearance of sudden divine punishment, when the actual cause is invisible biological contamination. Temperature and humidity monitoring in similar tomb environments has revealed that sealed chambers maintain conditions ideal for preserving not just archaeological artifacts, but also pathogenic microorganisms that can remain viable for extraordinary periods when protected from the sterilizing effects of sunlight and normal atmospheric conditions. The preservation of organic materials in the tomb created a unique environment where ancient biological hazards remained potent enough to affect modern visitors who lacked both immunity to extinct disease strains and knowledge of proper protective measures for archaeological work in contaminated spaces. Your investigation of individual case histories reveal patterns of exposure and illness that correlate with specific activities within the tomb complex. Workers who spent time in the burial chamber itself showed higher rates of respiratory problems, while those who handled textiles and organic artifacts developed skin conditions and infections that suggested contact with preserved biological contaminants. The medical records, when available, show progression of symptoms consistent with environmental toxin exposure rather than infectious disease transmission. The illnesses didn't spread from person to person, as true curses might be expected to do, but appeared in individuals based on their specific exposure levels and personal susceptibility to the hazards present in the tomb environment. Chemical analysis of mummification materials reveals the presence of compounds that could cause neurological symptoms, respiratory distress, and systemic toxicity when absorbed through skin contact or inhalation of particles disturbed during the excavation and artifact handling processes. The ancient Egyptians, ironically, may have created the perfect conditions for preserving biological hazards along with their precious artifacts. The same techniques that kept textiles, wood, and organic materials intact for 3 millennia also maintained populations of microorganisms that could prove dangerous to unprepared modern excavators. Your laboratory analysis of air samples from similar sealed tombs reveals concentrations of potentially harmful particles and microorganisms far exceeding levels considered safe for human exposure in industrial settings. The tomb environment represented an occupational health hazard that wouldn't be properly understood or protected against for decades. The international attention focused on Tutankhamun's tomb created additional pressures that may have contributed to health problems among expedition members. The stress of working under intense media scrutiny, combined with pressure to produce spectacular discoveries, created conditions that could compromise judgment about safety procedures and exposure limits. Documentation from the period reveals that many expedition members were already in poor health when they began work on the tomb project. Advanced age, pre-existing medical conditions, and the physical demands of archaeological work in Egypt's challenging climate created vulnerabilities that made them particularly susceptible to additional environmental hazards. The lack of modern medical support in the Valley of the Kings during the 1920s meant that symptoms that might be treatable today could quickly progress to serious illness or death when victims were hours away from proper medical care and decades away from antibiotics and other treatments that could address the types of infections they were likely encountering. Your research into similar archaeological projects reveals that tomb-related health problems weren't unique to Tutankhamun's discovery, but occurred at many excavation sites where sealed environments had preserved biological hazards for extended periods. The pattern suggests environmental rather than supernatural causation, though few sites received the media attention that made Tutankhamun's curse famous. The role of suggestion and expectation in creating health problems becomes apparent when you analyze the timing and nature of reported symptoms. Many victims developed problems only after being told about the supposed curse, suggesting that psychological factors may have triggered or amplified physical responses to actual environmental hazards present in the tomb. Modern protective equipment and procedures developed for hazardous environment work could have prevented most or all of the deaths attributed to the Pharaoh's curse, demonstrating that the hazards were real and manageable rather than supernatural and inevitable. The tragedy wasn't divine retribution, but inadequate understanding of occupational safety in unique archaeological environments. Your analysis of the specific biological agents found in tomb samples reveals several species known for causing symptoms that align perfectly with the documented illnesses experienced by expedition members. The mystery isn't why people got sick, but why it took so long to identify the real causes of their illnesses and deaths. The preservation of evidence within the tomb environment created an opportunity for modern forensic investigation that wouldn't exist in most historical cases. The same conditions that preserved artifacts also maintained biological evidence that could be analyzed decades later using techniques unavailable to the original investigators. Temperature cycling within the tomb, caused by daily opening and closing during excavation work, created conditions that promoted bacterial growth and spore activation, while also increasing the circulation of contaminated air throughout the complex, maximizing exposure for everyone working in the chambers. The specific types of materials handled by different expedition members correlate with the patterns of illness they developed, providing strong evidence for contact-based transmission of biological hazards rather than supernatural targeting. Those who handled organic materials showed different symptoms than those who worked primarily with stone and metal artifacts. Your investigation reveals that several expedition members who never entered the tomb chambers but worked with artifacts after their removal also developed health problems, suggesting that contamination could persist on objects even after they were brought into apparently safer environments. The hazards weren't confined to the tomb itself, but could travel with the artifacts. Chemical preservation techniques used by ancient embalmers included compounds that could cause contact dermatitis, respiratory irritation, and systemic toxicity when handled without proper protective equipment. Many of the symptoms attributed to supernatural causes align with known effects of exposure to these preservation chemicals in concentrated doses. The clustering of deaths around specific time frames during the excavation corresponds to periods when particular chambers were opened and explored, providing clear evidence that exposure levels determined health outcomes rather than supernatural forces targeting expedition members based on their roles. Modern air quality testing in similar tomb environments reveals concentrations of particulate matter and biological contaminants that would require immediate evacuation and decontamination procedures under current occupational safety standards. The expedition members were working in conditions that would be considered extremely hazardous today. Your final analysis incorporates both the biological evidence and the historical context to create a comprehensive explanation for the deaths that seemed so mysterious to earlier investigators. The curse was real in its effects, but natural in its causes. A combination of environmental hazards, inadequate safety protocols, and psychological stress that created conditions for preventable deaths that seemed supernatural only because the real causes remained invisible to investigators lacking modern forensic tools and techniques. The irony of the situation becomes clear as your investigation concludes. The earlier Egyptians' skill at preservation created hazards that persisted for millennia, while the modern excavators' ignorance of those hazards made them vulnerable to dangers that proper precautions could have prevented. The real curse was the gap between ancient preservation techniques and modern safety knowledge. Public health implications of your findings extend beyond archaeological work to include any situation where people might encounter preserved biological materials from historical periods. The lessons learned from investigating the Pharaoh's curse contribute to safer procedures for handling potentially contaminated historical artifacts in museums, libraries, and archaeological collections worldwide. The psychological component of the curse phenomenon provides insights into how fear and expectation can amplify real physical dangers while also creating additional health risks through stress-related immune suppression. Understanding this mechanism helps explain why the deaths seem to validate supernatural explanations, while actually demonstrating the complex interaction between mind and body in dangerous situations. As your investigation reaches its conclusion, the pattern becomes unmistakably clear. The curse that wasn't a curse was actually a perfect storm of environmental hazards, inadequate safety measures, and psychological stress that created conditions for preventable deaths that seemed supernatural only because the real causes remained invisible to investigators lacking modern forensic tools and techniques. The resolution of the mystery provides both scientific satisfaction and a sobering reminder that what appears supernatural often proves to be natural phenomena that aren't yet understood. The Pharaoh's curse becomes a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough investigation before accepting extraordinary explanations for unusual events. Your report will contribute to improved safety protocols for archaeological work and help prevent similar tragedies in future excavations of sealed historical sites. The victims of the supposed curse become pioneers in occupational safety, their deaths contributing to knowledge that will protect future researchers from the real but manageable hazards present in preserved historical environments. The media sensation surrounding the Pharaoh's curse gradually gives way to scientific understanding, though the dramatic story of supernatural retribution will likely persist longer than the more mundane but accurate explanation of environmental hazards and inadequate safety procedures. Truth, as always, proves more complex and ultimately more interesting than fiction. As you prepare your final documentation, the laboratory grows quiet in the Egyptian evening, filled with the satisfaction that comes from solving a mystery that has puzzled investigators for decades. The curse that terrified the public turns out to be a solvable problem in occupational safety, preventable with proper knowledge and precautions. The ancient pharaoh Tutankhamun, far from seeking vengeance against those who disturbed his rest, becomes an inadvertent teacher about the importance of understanding environmental hazards and protecting human health in challenging working conditions. His tomb's dangers were real, but they were dangers that knowledge and preparation could overcome. Tonight, as the mystery finally yields to scientific investigation, you can rest knowing that fear and superstition have been replaced by understanding and prevention. The curse that wasn't a curse becomes a triumph of rational inquiry over supernatural explanation, demonstrating humanity's ability to solve even the most puzzling mysteries through patient observation and careful analysis. The gentle evening air of Cairo carries the sounds of a city settling into rest, while your laboratory holds the quiet satisfaction of questions answered and puzzles solved through the application of scientific method to problems that seemed to defy natural explanation. And in the peaceful Egyptian night, illuminated by electric lights that would have seemed magical to ancient tomb builders, we can rest knowing that some mysteries yield their secrets to patient investigation, revealing natural causes behind supernatural fears and demonstrating that understanding conquers superstition one carefully analyzed clue at a time. The eternal questions about life, death, and the unknown continue to challenge human curiosity. But tonight's investigation proves that rational inquiry can illuminate even the darkest mysteries, transforming fear into knowledge and superstition into science, one methodical discovery at a time. The curse that wasn't a curse rests quietly in the archives, its secrets finally revealed through the patient work of investigators who understood that the most compelling mysteries often have the most interesting natural explanations, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look beyond supernatural fear toward scientific truth and understanding. And as sleep comes to both the investigators and the mysteries they solve, the night holds the quiet promise that knowledge will always triumph over ignorance, that understanding will eventually overcome fear, and that the patient application of scientific method can illuminate even the most seemingly supernatural phenomena, revealing the fascinating natural world that lies behind every mystery that seems too strange to be real. In the gentle darkness that embraces both ancient tombs and modern laboratories, we find peace in knowing that human curiosity and scientific dedication can solve even the most enduring puzzles, transforming supernatural terror into natural wonder and replacing the fear of unknown curses with the satisfaction of understood science, one careful investigation at a time. The mystery sleeps peacefully now, its secrets revealed, its fears conquered, and its lessons preserved for future generations of investigators who will continue the eternal human quest to understand our world through observation, analysis, and the patient pursuit of truth that turns the supernatural into the perfectly, beautifully natural.